I'm not trying to define what hard solipsism is. I'm saying there's two options you have when you're defining hard solipsism. One is that you're including things outside of your intentions and experiences, and therefore really you're creating an isomorphic model to non-solipsism, and it's not really an interesting distinction.
Let's have a layman's conversation first, and then we can kind of expand into the philosophical jargon.
And where did you think there was philosophical jargon there? All I said was you have a couple of options.
I tried to lay some groundwork, and then you objected before I was able to actually make the statement. Now, you have a brain in a vat.
Oh.
You are the brain in the vat.
I am the brain in the vat?
You are the brain in the vat. Let's assume for the sake of saying so that you are the brain in the vat. Mm-hmm. And being the brain in the vat, you are experiencing you sitting down in this chair having a Google Hangout with me. Is there any way that you can verify that what you're experiencing is actually happening, or verify that you are in fact...
You're opening up a whole can of worms that I don't think is necessary to deal with, and it's going to bring up a lot of extended...
That's solipsism. That's hard solipsism.
Oh.
The brain in the vat is just skepticism about the external world.
Yeah, and the uniformity of nature. And that's a different type of skepticism, one that's different than solipsism.
How does uniformity of nature figure into it?
Well, because if you're in the brain in the vat, the idea is that things can change. Things can cease to be uniform, right? And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about solipsism.
How can things cease to be uniform if you're a brain in the vat?
Well, they could just switch the electrodes around.
Oh, you're talking about somebody else can alter the vat. Let's assume nobody else alters the vat.
What's controlling your experiences?
Jesus. Oh,
gotta be rigorous. Gotta be rigorous, my friend.
We have to.
I always thought that solipsism was the idea that there was no matter, there was no material.
Yeah, well, if you're a brain in a vat, there is matter. There's a brain.
Which is the reason why the metaphor is failing.
And there's a vat.
Ignoring the part of the metaphor that's actually the description.
Yeah, you guys are getting nitpicky
No, Helena's
picking on the vat.
Yeah, they're attacking the vat, which is like, what? Are you kidding me?
Helena's having none of it.
Ignores the value of the metaphor.
No, but it's making me realize that we're skipping a lot of steps. We're taking a lot for granted here.
Okay, I think it means a disembodied mind, and that's all there is. There's no matter. There's no material.
Okay.
That includes vats and brains.
Including the vat.
I like Helena's example of a disembodied mind being all there is. I think that's a good starting base.
No, but I think I understand the confusion. There's a lot to explain. The sort of materialist and idealist distinction is not a real distinction.
I have an issue with what happened about the brain in the vat.
I want to hear about this claim that it's a difference without it's a distinction. It doesn't make any difference.
It's not a real distinction. Do you want to try? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. I know what you're talking about, but I don't think we need to get into that.
Well, look, what Helen just said is I thought solipsism meant that there's no material reality, and so first it's important to explain that is really ends up being isomorphic to non-solipsism. It's not an interesting distinction because you could show that we can model the same way we think of our world right now, and all you're doing is calling material, non-material. You're calling it ideal.
Yeah, I remember.
Is Jack on? Because he can help me with this.
Now, when the brain in the vat
Why are we going back to the brain in the vat?
Say what?
Yaniv is antagonizing you.
I am confused. I thought we just established that we need to first ask ourselves, is there a distinction between the materialist world and the idealist world?
Well, Yaniv, I disagree that we have to do that. I think Helena's example is perfect to start refuting solipsism.
Well, we have to.
What happened with the brain in the vat was I asked a question and you guys went around the question and attacked the vat.
Why did we go back to the brain in the vat? Justin has to rely on the idealist materialist distinction.
So, brain in the vat. You're sitting in a vat.
Look, let's all not kid ourselves. Yaniv pulls ranks to fucking fall in line, alright? But I'm tired of the insubordination.
He doesn't understand the ranking system yet.
Does your group have a name?
Solipsists.
No.
I think their name is the Nitpickers.
Nitpickers. I plead guilty.
All right.
Okay.
All right, let's go on, because I still want to hear this debunking.
If someone else wants to give a different answer, I'm happy to sit on the sidelines, but that really would be my response to this.
Go for it, Yaniv.
What the hell is Jack?
I'm still missing it. What's the criticism?
It's kind of showing. So if this is what you
see, what Yaniv wants to say, which I
just in case you thought you were the only one.
Yaniv was explaining it.
I can because I think it's quicker to summarize than to actually go through. I think what Yaniv wants to say is that when we're talking about substances, whether it's material or mental substances, the difference between the two views doesn't amount to anything more than a semantic difference. So there is some kind of substance, we either call it material or we call it mental.
there isn't really a real distinction between something having extension in space and not having extension in space. And so if that's what you mean by solipsism, it can't be refuted, but it also isn't saying anything.
No, that's the point is that you cannot prove that you're not the brain in the vat.
Well, I agree that you cannot prove you're not the brain in the vat. But,
okay.
Okay. That
is the irrefutable aspect of solipsism, right there. That's it.
If that's how you want to define solipsism and you want to leave it at that, I'll accept it. There's no need.
That's all that I wanted to explain was that.
So now that we've established this simple thing about solipsism,
we should definitely go back to speaking to Ocean.
No, I want to hear.
I'm going to start hitting people with
I want to hear about this claim.
Oh. So it's basically the idea is that, look, okay, so look, I assume you think that color is a property of mind, right? Not something that exists in the world. You might think that there's wavelengths in the world and that's what causes the experience of color, right?
Probably. I mean, it takes an interaction. I see it more interactive. The color as our minds experience it, I would agree with that.
Ocean, what about you? Do you agree with that?
I kind of phased out. I'm sorry. I was kind of letting the conversation go between you and...
So I'd rather deal with both of you at once. So
okay, go ahead and ask again.
I assume you think that color is a property of mind, not something that exists in the world. You might think that there's like a wavelength in the world.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's almost definitional, right? We can't ask what is it like to experience a wavelength without experience. That's nonsensical question.
Okay,
color is an experiential term.
Go on.
Well, no, I don't want to go on if there's hesitation. Let's solve that because it's.
Go on means I accept your premise provisionally.
Yeah, provisionally. Yes, that's exactly what go on means.
Why the provisional? I'd like full acceptance. Okay, so same thing with sound, right? There's variations in pressures. They hit your eardrum. Your eardrum, you have a canal in your ear. You have a nerve in your ear that gets triggered, produces something in your brain, ends up in the experience of the sound. Correct?
I mean, maybe.
Provisionally.
Helena, he wants to separate the experience from the external events.
I know.
If you want to use different words, I'm fine with that. But I need to know how you want to refer to the part that's experienced versus the part that you're saying we're interacting with. Because they're not the same thing, right? You can have, as you said,
they're not the same thing. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say they could be separated, though.
Oh, so you can't have illusory sounds or illusory visions?
No, you can, but then you're not experiencing sound.
Okay, so what would you call...
But if this is just semantics, I'm perfectly willing to go after semantics because I want to get at what you're thinking.
But give me the language and I'll use your language. Can we call it qualia? Can we say the qualia is separate from the wavelength? The qualia of sound is separate from the wavelength? I just want to establish the language so there isn't confusion.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll use the word qualia instead of experience.
You can even use experience. By experience, you mean qualia. The effect that the sound has.
The effect that the wavelength has, I would say. So yeah.
That's okay with me, yes.
Nitpicking again?
You're talking about Helena?
No, you.
I'm nitpicking your mom.
So anyway, I'd like to sort of make the argument that even though traditionally in sort of philosophy, or I don't actually know if it's traditional, but my understanding is that people traditionally treated those as secondary properties, but extension in space as a primary property, meaning that is not like sound and color. But I'd like to point out that I think that it's completely parallel. We have qualia of extension in space.
And you want to say that extension in space is like sound?
Yes. So.
Okay, let me contemplate that. Keep going.
Well, no. You want to contemplate it, or you want me to keep going?
I want to contemplate while you keep going.
Yeah, that's impressive.
She wants to do it. Doesn't mean she's capable of doing it.
When someone says something like that, Yaniv, they say that it means they're provisionally holding it and thinking about it while you continue your argument to see how it affects everything else.
I like to finish one step before moving on to the other. So if there's hesitation,
the step is finished when that happens.
What'd you say?
The step is finished when that happens.
Well, if there's hesitations, I can give further arguments, for example.
What I'm doing when I say that, I'm holding my conception of what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm holding it in one bag.
Okay.
And I've got my conception in one bag.
Yes.
And they're mooshing together.
Okay.
I need the rest of what's in your bag.
Only a woman would have explained it in that way.
Anyway, so let's talk now about the distinction between materiality versus sort of non-materiality. Or the way we traditionally talk about material versus the way now we talk about maybe physicality. So one of the things that we traditionally thought of as material is having extension in space as if that was some kind of concrete property of the world that was not mind-dependent. things have extension, they're just there. Once you realize that extensionality is a property of mind, just like color and space, it means just like we convert color to wavelength, we now have to think that what does extensionality convert to, right? They're not concrete things that exist outside of the mind.
That's kind of akin to when you go, well, everything is subjective. It's kind of that same kind of idea.
Yeah. So now let's reevaluate what we mean by materials, if we no longer mean something that has extension in space, and what we mean by like an idealist property, and what's the distinction, right? We no longer mean extensionality in space because that's a property of the mind.
You are now then saying that even the wavelength is a property of the mind.
So, yeah, because it's defined in experiential terms.
Defined in experiential terms, I think is good. I do not disagree with that.
Excellent.
All right, next.
What do we have in the bag? I forget where we were. Oh, yes. So now let's talk about again what we mean by what would be the distinction between material substance versus idealist substance.
Right, because you've just said there isn't one.
Exactly. Do you understand why?
Yeah, because you're saying that even the wavelengths themselves are idealist.
Well, I'm not saying I don't think calling them ideals or material is a real distinction. We no longer, by idealist, we don't mean something like spiritual.
Of course, I know that. Yes. I didn't think that's what you meant.
Good. Just making sure. So I fail to see a distinction between. All we could say is that there is something outside of our experience that constrain experiences. The nature of that thing. Anytime we try to describe its true nature, what we're doing is we're going back to experiential terms. But to talk about true nature in experiential terms is to say something like, what is it really like to experience this external thing without experience? Or what is it like? What is the qualia of these eternal things without qualia? It doesn't really make sense. The question is sort of nonsensical. And so the distinction between an idealist and materialist view is not a real distinction. And so going back to the solipsism thing, if all you're saying when you're saying solipsism is, well, everything is really just ideals, then it's not that interesting.
It just seems like what you're saying is only kind of trivially true. It's kind of like when people go, but everything is subjective. I mean, yeah, okay.
I agree with that.
It's trivial. It's true, but it's only trivially true. Do you see what I mean?
Well, it's
the only thing that I was trying to present was
a trivial claim. I'm with you, Helena. I don't like when people say, well, these things are technically the same, therefore we should treat them the same. But I'm saying that when the solipsist is making their argument, they're really relying on that triviality.
You're saying you can use that against those particular solipsists.
Yeah, I think it's meaningful to make a distinction between things that we appear to have an extension in space. But
yeah.
I'm just not sure how that's the debate we're having. I don't see how solipsism is a debate about substances. It's more to me a debate about where the constraints are. A solipsist has to say...
No, Justin, we're not saying that I'm not making a claim about what solipsism is. I'm saying you have two choices. If you're going to make the claim that solipsism includes things outside of your experience, then you really, and those things happen to be ideal substances, then it's really not different than saying non-solipsism.
I think Justin's right, though. The substance is irrelevant.
It's totally irrelevant.
It's whether or not the constraints exist within your mind or external to your mind.
That's the second leg, though, because so the point is...
I think you agree that all properties have to be relativized to the mind.
Yeah, but you have to think of it as a sort of decision tree. Okay, so if you're going to treat the mind as merely experience and intentionality, or just experience, then the substance doesn't matter. If you're going to start talking about things outside of your experience and intentionality, constraining your experience and intentionality, but it's still solipsism because those constraints are non-material, then you have to talk about, well, why is it significant to say that they're not material? It's not significant, right? So at some point Helena said, she said the word something like, I thought that solipsism just meant that there's no material reality.
But on either case, the real crux of the issue is still where the constraints are. They're either outside of your mind or inside. On whichever version of the substance account you're taking.
Yeah, but again, there's a version of that still ends up being isomorphic with non-solipsism. It depends on how you define mind. So that's what I'm saying. There's different paths these solipsists take. One of them is to define mind as including things like the subconscious, in which case you're really just including something external to what I would traditionally call the mind. And that can be as big as our universe. CK, you saw this point earlier. Can you explain it?
I tuned way out.
Well, I think at this point that we've conceded solipsism
Well, I am saying that if your definition of solipsism is merely something like the substance of things is, it's an ideal substance, then I'm saying, sure, you could say that, and I don't actually have a disagreement.
There's still the argument to be made about what constrains experience, right?
Yeah, but ideal substance can constrain experience, just like material substance. There's no difference. So it's not interesting to say it's idealist substances that are constraining my experiences versus not.
Those limitations would be inside the mind. They would be generated by the mind.
What is the limitation of the mind? Where is that boundary? Let's just rewind, because there was something you agreed with earlier that sort of, you remember what's left to the mind if you remove intentions and qualia. So if you want to say that the mind is just intentions and qualia, then you're back to the version of solipsism which I refute. If you want to say it's not, there's more to the mind, then you're really saying something that's isomorphic to non-solipsism. You have two options. Neither
I would
is
say that the mind would generate those limitations on its own.
Yeah, but we have to define mind in one of two ways. I think he should.
Okay, let's take a dream, for example. When you're in a dream, are there constraints or are there not constraints?
There are constraints.
I believe there are constraints. Yeah.
Okay. What are those constraints?
Well, I mean, I think that neuroscience is involved in what ends up being involved in your dream. I think even external events influence your dreams.
Have you ever had a lucid dream?
Have I ever had a lucid dream? I'm not sure if I have or not.
Lucid dream is when you can basically control what happens.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yeah. I don't remember if I...
I love doing this. I think it's great.
So look, Ocean, let's go back. Okay, what is a mind? Yeah, but if I'm understanding correctly,
we could have gone on to another subject.
Look, so supposing they take a route like that, Yaniv, they still have to have some kind of account of constraints on experience.
Let me jump in real quick. I'm talking with Xbox, and he says he's really interested in having a hangout with you guys, hosting one where we talk about solipsism.
So Justin, do you see how someone can come up with a term mind and include things outside of experience and intentionality, such that what's outside is as big as our universe and really can include all the constraints of our universe?
Then they still have to give an account of what constrains their experiences, right? And if their mind is just everything, and they still say that the constraints are within that mind.
I'm gonna be Xbox. I'm gonna read what he's telling me over Skype right now. He says if experience is part of the minds, this means I can come up with languages, inventions, math, numbers, etc., without ever having had an interaction with them, and anything being external. So he doesn't have to interact with anything. It should just create it. If experience is part of the mind.
Again, I think the thing we pasted in the link before addresses that. Justin.
He says he rejects the idea of rolling experience in with a mind as a definition.
Yeah, Neve, I'm listening.
Okay, so look, so by my definition of mind,
I'm going to paste this over to him and see what he thinks about it.
My definition of mind that it's merely something like experience. But if you want to sneak in more, you could say, well, mind includes the subconscious. Now, if you say subconscious and you say, well, there's all these things in my subconscious and they follow rules and how things work, you've really created an isomorphic model to our world, and it really has no different implications or meaning. You've really just defined the entire universe and you're just calling it subconscious. There's no different implications. The brain in the vat does have different implications. And that's why I hesitated there, because there is a uniformity of nature issue. And so it depends on what Ocean wants to do. If he wants to, that's why I said we should first force him to define mind.
But you need to have the problem not come up on both. So let's say that someone does say that their subconscious is part of the mind. Well, they're still generating that subconscious, right? Which means something needs to constrain it.
No, if the subconscious is the entire universe, it's the same as saying,
But they're a solipsist in this case. So the entire universe is just their own creation.
No, it's not. What makes it their own creation? The mind doesn't have to be your own creation.
Well, this is solipsism, right?
What does it mean to create your subconscious? I don't understand what that would even mean.
In solipsism, there is nothing other than your own experiences,
your mind is the way it is for whatever reason. You didn't create it, right? Same really is the universe. Why is the universe there?
But that's a constraint.
Say again? Maybe I'm wrong. There might be one implication, which is that if you stop experiencing stuff, nothing else should be experiencing stuff. That might be the only implication of that distinction.
Well, it seems like you just imposed a constraint, though, right? You said your mind is whatever way it is. You need to appeal to an outside constraint. That's the whole argument that we're trying to make. Why is your mind the way it is?
Yeah, I mean, you can always talk. That applies to any sort of types of solipsism. You could always say, well, why? That's another type of argument against it, I think.
Well, I'm saying that the same objection just resurfaces. Once again, you have to appeal to say, anytime you say something is this way, right, under solipsism, anytime you make that statement, you're appealing to a constraint. And our whole argument that we have logically says that you have to appeal to something outside of your own mind for a real constraint.
Yeah, but they might say something like, I can imagine someone saying something like, well, look, in this possible world, the only thing that exists is my mind, and it happened to randomly come about.
Sure, but it came about in a particular way, and if it's going to stay in that particular way, that state, then it's constrained. And once again, if it's constrained, we need to appeal to why, and how it's constrained.
Hang on. I have some notes from Xbox real quick.
Yaniv, do you mean something like our experiences seem ordered, but it's actually random and just appears ordered?
That's a different statement.
Yeah.
I have some notes from Xbox if you want to...
Well, it's going to be easier if we're talking to him directly. This is going to be a sort of...
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I think that there's some stuff that you're saying that...
come in?
The guy's got a sleeping wife, so...
Well, it's going to take a lot of argument.
He'll take the side chat.
Well, he may not be a sops.
Hey, Xbox. Now, who all is on their phone so they can't see the side chat?
I'm not on the phone.
I can read.
I'm on my phone.
Okay, yeah, that's CK. That's what I thought. I mean, I've been reading for him, so he says that he can't get his mic. His wife is sleeping. So.
Okay, Xbox. So are you a solipsist?
This is going to be an even more painful conversation than the last 3 hours.
If you, it's got to have a lag time.
I think Ocean was quite smart for handing it off.
Yeah, that's what they tend to do when they lose.
Yeah.
Oh,
We agreed, assholes. Got like.
Yeah, that's how you lose. We get you to agree with us.
I think I got you to agree with me.
Yeah, that's the other way that
There's a version of solipsism that cannot be.
I think,
That's all I was trying to say.
Seamus, did you hear that?
That's the other way that we lose.
Hold on. It would actually be
For the exchange of ideas.
Did Helena try and refer to it as an exchange of ideas?
That's usually what goes on.
That's ridiculous.
I want to throttle you sometimes, but I like it.
I don't fully remember. I haven't thought through epistemological solipsism, but it might not be that different than transcendental idealism in some ways.
They're saying that they restrict the things that they can know, but they have a lot of beliefs.
I don't understand still, I'm sorry.
Well, I think they're just essentially saying they can't know anything, or they can know very few things, like they exist. Nevertheless, they believe that they have a wife.
Yeah, that would be exactly the way I would see it.
They know that they exist, yet they believe they have a wife.
No. Yeah, so they know they exist, but beliefs beyond that they can't know, yet they still believe them.
I'm just trying to process it. It's been a while.
He's written, I think something is happening. Something exists. That is the only known thing. Can't even say, I know I exist. I have faith and take a prima facie case of reality. That's my position.
The emphasis that Helena added to that. She dramatized it quite a bit. I was reading it very flat. Like, I have faith. I was reading it like Hal.
Well, I mean, what Xbox is describing is global skepticism. This isn't an ontological claim about only the self exists.
I still don't follow what it is. I'm sorry. Could someone explain it to me?
Yaniv, they're just taking in epistemic view of solipsism. They're saying, well, I mean, honestly, what Xbox is describing is global skepticism because he denies that he knows even he exists, which makes it not solipsism at all. So, I mean, it's not really what we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
Not solipsism.
I still don't fully understand my entire view. What does it mean to so he doesn't believe he exists or he doesn't know he exists?
He can't even know for sure he exists.
So it says by what means.
In the chat, he just said he doesn't know if he can exist.
Well, what would it mean for you to exist?
Well, to have experiences, and I mean that's definitely
You
the way.
don't know if you have experiences? What would it mean to have an illusion of having experience? What would it mean to have an illusion that you're having qualia?
He's also going, what does it mean to experience your mind?
I don't think you experience your mind. You could say you experience computation your brain is doing.
We're saying the mind is constituted by experiences and possibly other things, but that doesn't mean you have to experience your mind. It just means the mind just is.
The mind refers to a series of experiences.
It's a constitutive account, not a self-referential one.
But I'm still a little confused. Do you think that you can have an illusion of having a qualia?
He says, how do you argue that the mind is only experience?
Well, we went over this earlier. What else would the mind be if not experience?
Yeah, can you explain? Let's remove experience and tell me what
he defines it earlier as a series of mental events.
A series of mental events.
Define a mental event. Remove experience and remove intentions and define a mental event. It's the same thing. You just shifted the question to another step.
Thinking.
And also let us know if you think you can have an illusion of having a qualia or be mistaken that you have a qualia.
That's the answer. Is it's thinking.
So how is thinking different than
thinking is intentional.
It says thinking is not an experience.
Well, you could just add, if you want, you could just add intentions. Although I disagree that thinking is not an experience. I think when we use the word thinking, we're referring. You could say my brain did processing. Say my brain had some subconscious calculations. But it's rare that we'll refer to something without qualia as thinking.
But then, do you think that qualia has propositional content, Yaniv?
No, I'm not saying that qualia is sufficient to call something thinking. I'm saying that when we use the word thinking, we're referring to the qualia and what it's a qualia of.
All right. He says that from his stance, the mind experiences thoughts, but the thinking of the mind is a process. Wait, not the think. His mind experiences thoughts, but not the thinking. The mind is a process.
Your mind. What is again? If
he's saying that you can have a quale of intentional states, but the intentional states are distinct from quale.
But the question is, even if we concede that, so what?
Yeah, so what?
Yeah, so what?
So what?
Yeah,
Solipsis guy.
No, really though, Xbox. Assuming we concede that the mind is constituted by intentionality and qualia, where does the argument go from there?
Yeah, this solipsistic Xbox has nothing. Ridiculous.
So, should we move on to moral realism?